Bullies shamed the janitor's daughter until they got exactly what they deserved. "You missed a spot, janitor's kid," Dylan sneered, knocking over a trash can as laughter echoed through the hall. "Don't worry, Ava," he smirked. "Your mom can clean it up. It's what she's paid for, right?" The cafeteria roared when he poured milk at her feet. "Oops, guess your mom's on mop duty again." At just 12 years old, Ava Peterson, small, quiet, and invisible, was already marked as the outcast. But behind her stillness was a secret no one in Northwood High could imagine. A legacy forged not in fear, but in discipline and honor. And the moment she raised her head, locking eyes with the school's most feared bully, everything changed. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A 12-year-old girl with a quiet secret was about to change everything for the town's toughest bullies. This small, unassuming child carried a legacy forged in discipline and honor. And soon, everyone at Northwood High School would learn that the greatest strength is not always what you can see. The morning air in the town of Oak Haven, Illinois, was crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass and old brick. It was a scent of tradition, of football games on Friday nights and quiet Sunday mornings. For Carol Peterson, it was the smell of a new beginning. For her 12-year-old daughter, Ava, it smelled only of uncertainty. Northwood High School rose before them, a formidable building of red brick and tall, imposing windows that seemed to look down on them with judgment. Carol squeezed her daughter's shoulder, her work keys jingling softly. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," she said, her voice a mixture of hope and exhaustion. "It's a good school. You'll make friends." Ava looked from her mother's worn hands to the massive school doors. She was small for her age, a slip of a girl with fine, blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, took in everything with a quiet, watchful intensity that was unusual for a child. At 12, she was entering a world of teenagers, a middle schooler granted early entry into the high school due to district rezoning. She was already an outsider by age alone. Her mother's new job made it worse. Carol wasn't a teacher or an administrator. She was the new janitor. "I know, Mom," Ava said, her voice barely a whisper. She clutched the strap of her backpack, a hand-me-down from a cousin. Inside, her books were neatly arranged, but a small, worn photograph was tucked into the front pocket. It was a picture of an old man in a crisp military uniform, his eyes the same clear blue as hers, crinkled at the corners with a smile that was both kind and impossibly tough. Her grandfather, General Michael "Iron Mike" Callahan. They had moved to Oak Haven after the money ran out. After the long illness that had taken her grandmother, they sold the old family house in Virginia, the one near the military base where everyone knew and respected the Callahan name. Here, they were nobody. Worse than nobody. In the unforgiving social hierarchy of high school, Ava knew exactly what they were. She was the janitor's daughter. The first few days were a study in invisibility. Ava learned the school's geography not by the classroom numbers, but by the routes that offered the fewest encounters. She ate her lunch in a quiet corner of the library, the faint scent of old paper a comfort. She spoke only when spoken to, her answers short and polite. She observed. Her grandfather had taught her that. "Observation is your first line of defense, Ava," he'd say, sitting with her on the porch of the old Virginia house. He never taught her to fight. He taught her to see, to notice how people walked, how they stood, how their eyes shifted. He taught her about balance, leverage, and the economy of motion. "The loudest man in the room is often the weakest," he told her. "Strength is quiet. It's controlled." At Northwood High, the loudest man was Dylan Hayes. He was a senior, the star quarterback of the football team, with a chiseled jaw and an easy swagger that parted the crowded hallways like a ship's bow through water. He was handsome, popular, and deeply unkind. His strength was not quiet. It was a blunt instrument he used to enforce his place at the top of the food chain. He was always flanked by his two lieutenants, Mark, a thick-necked lineman who laughed at everything Dylan said, and Chris, smaller and wiry, with a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face. Ava first came to their attention on a Wednesday. She was walking past the cafeteria when Mark, with a clumsy, deliberate motion, knocked a full trash can over, its contents spilling across the polished floor. "Oh, man, what a mess," Mark boomed, looking directly at Ava. Dylan stepped forward, a mock-sympathetic look on his face. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure the help will get it." He winked at Ava. "Isn't that right? Your mom's on duty, isn't she?" Laughter rippled through the students nearby. Ava felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. Her gaze flickered to the spilled garbage, soda cans, half-eaten sandwiches, crumpled napkins. She saw her mother on her hands and knees later that day, her back aching, wiping it all up. Something cold and hard settled in Ava's stomach. She remembered her grandfather's words. "Control, Ava. Emotion is a weapon your enemy uses against you." She said nothing. She simply adjusted her backpack and walked away, the sound of their laughter following her down the hall. The next day, it escalated. Ava was in the lunch line when she felt a shove from behind. She stumbled, catching herself on the counter. "Watch it, little kid," Chris sneered. "This line is for high schoolers. She's allowed to be here." A girl in front of her mumbled, not quite daring to look at Chris. Dylan appeared, placing a heavy hand on Chris's shoulder. Now be nice. She's special. She's the daughter of our very own cleaning lady. We should show her some respect." He leaned in close to Ava, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me, does the smell of bleach ever wash off?" This time, Ava looked up, her clear blue eyes meeting his. She didn't flinch. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. Her stillness seemed to unnerve him for a fraction of a second. It was like looking at a placid lake, with no hint of the depths beneath. He recovered quickly, letting out a short, harsh laugh. He picked up a carton of milk from her tray, opened it, and poured it onto the floor at her feet. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Clumsy me. Don't worry, I'm sure your mom can handle it. It's what she's paid for, right?" The entire cafeteria had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Teachers were at the far end of the room, distracted. No one moved to intervene. Ava looked down at the puddle of milk spreading around her shoes. She felt the familiar anger, cold and sharp, but this time, something else rose with it, a quiet resolve. Her grandfather had taught her about strategic retreats, but he also taught her about holding the line. "There comes a time," he had said, "when you cannot give another inch, because if you do, you will lose more than just ground. You will lose yourself." This was that time. She slowly raised her head, her eyes locking onto Dylan's. The cafeteria was so silent, the hum of the fluorescent lights was audible. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper. It was calm, clear, and carried across the cavernous room. "You're right," she said. "My mother will clean that up. She'll do it without complaint, because she has more dignity and strength in her little finger than you have in your entire body." A collective gasp went through the student body. No one, ever, spoke to Dylan Hayes like that. Dylan's smile vanished. His face darkened with fury. "What did you just say to me, you little brat?" "You heard me," Ava continued, her voice unwavering. "You think you're strong because you can push people around and make a mess for others to clean. That's not strength. That's weakness." He took a step toward her, his fists clenching. Mark and Chris moved to flank him, their expressions menacing. "You've got a big mouth for a little girl," Dylan growled. "And you've got a big ego for someone who has never been tested," Ava replied, her calm infuriating him further. She took a small, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. The move was so unexpected, so utterly fearless, that he hesitated. "I'm tired of this," she said, her voice dropping slightly, yet losing none of its intensity. "I'm tired of you disrespecting my mother. I'm tired of you thinking you can do whatever you want." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. "So let's settle it. After school. In the parking lot behind the gym. Just you and me." She looked from his face to his clenched fists. "No friends. No audience. We'll find out who's really weak." The challenge hung in the air, audacious and unbelievable. A 12-year-old girl, who barely reached Dylan's chest, had just challenged the king of the school to a fight. A wave of murmurs and whispers broke the silence. Dylan stared at her, his face a storm of disbelief and rage. He saw the challenge as the ultimate insult, an act of defiance so profound he couldn't ignore it. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed. "You want to fight? You've got it. I'm going to enjoy teaching you a lesson. The lesson won't be for me. Ava said, her blue eyes as cold and steady as ice. She turned, picked up what was left of her lunch tray, and walked to the trash can, dumping it with a steady hand. Then, without a backward glance, she walked out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a sea of stunned faces and a fuming quarterback who had just accepted the most absurd challenge of his life. The catalyst was set. The line had been drawn. And in the quiet heart of a 12-year-old girl, a general's legacy was about to be unleashed. The news of the challenge spread through Northwood High like a wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, the story had morphed and grown. Some said Ava had threatened Dylan with a knife. Others claimed she was a secret martial arts expert. The most common theory was that the little girl had simply snapped. Everyone agreed on one thing. She was going to be annihilated. Ava spent her last class, history, in a state of calm focus. While the teacher lectured about ancient civilizations, Ava was running through different scenarios in her head. She cataloged Dylan's physical attributes from her observations. He was about 6 feet tall, maybe 180 pounds, all muscle. He was right-handed and favored his right side when moving, a common trait for quarterbacks. His aggression was his main weapon, but it was also his greatest weakness. He was a creature of impulse, not strategy. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Never fight angry, Ava. Anger is a flood. It drowns thought. Your mind must be like a quiet pond. See the ripples. Understand what causes them. Then, and only then, you act. As she walked out of the school, she saw her mother at the far end of the main hallway, pushing a large yellow cleaning cart. Carol looked up and gave her a small, worried wave. Ava knew her mother had heard the rumors. The whole school was buzzing. She gave her mom a reassuring nod, trying to convey a confidence she only partly felt. The weight of her promise, to settle this, was heavy, but the weight of the disrespect shown to her mother was heavier. The parking lot behind the gym was deserted, just as she'd hoped. The long shadows of the afternoon stretched across the cracked asphalt. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees bordering the lot. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the violence that was promised. Dylan was already there. To Ava's surprise and relief, he had kept his word. He was alone. He had taken off his Letterman jacket and thrown it on the ground. He stood in a t-shirt and jeans, his arms crossed over his muscular chest. He looked like a predator waiting for its prey. "I'm surprised you showed up," he sneered as she approached. "I figured you'd run home crying to your mommy." Ava stopped about 10 feet away from him, placing her backpack neatly on the ground. She didn't rise to the bait. "I said I'd be here." "Big mistake," he said, uncrossing his arms and rolling his shoulders. "I'm going to make this quick. And I want you to remember this pain every time you even think about looking at me again." He moved first, just as she predicted. He didn't circle or strategize. He charged. It was a pure explosion of rage and power, a football player's tackle aimed at a small, stationary target. He intended to slam her into the ground and end it in seconds. For an outside observer, it would have looked like an impending tragedy. For Ava, it was a simple equation of physics. Mass times velocity, a straight line of attack, a predictable trajectory. She did not retreat. She did not brace for impact. At the very last second, as his hands were reaching for her, she took one small, precise step to her left. It was a simple, almost elegant movement. Dylan, committed to his forward momentum, suddenly found his target gone. He plunged past her, his arms grabbing at empty air. As he passed, Ava pivoted. She didn't use her fist. She used her open palm. She struck the back of his right knee, a technique her grandfather called a tendon strike. It wasn't about power, it was about precision. The blow was sharp and perfectly placed. Dylan's right leg buckled instantly. The supporting muscles and tendons, taken completely by surprise, gave way. He let out a grunt of shock and pain, his forward charge turning into a stumbling, uncontrolled fall. He crashed to the asphalt, scraping his hands and the knee of his jeans. He twisted around, his face a mask of confusion and fury. "What the?" "You lead with your right side," Ava said, her voice even. She hadn't even broken a sweat. She stood calmly, watching him. "You put all your weight on your front foot. It leaves you off balance." The explanation only enraged him more. He scrambled to his feet, his knees screaming in protest. The surprise was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous intent. "You got lucky," he snarled. "That's not going to happen again." This time, he came at her more cautiously, but the anger was still there, clouding his judgment. He threw a wild, looping punch with his right hand, aiming for her head. It was a haymaker, powerful enough to knock a grown man out. Ava saw it coming a mile away. His shoulders telegraphed the move. His eyes were fixed on the target. She didn't duck under it or jump back. She moved into it. She stepped forward, inside the arc of his punch, so that his arm swung harmlessly behind her. Now she was too close for him to hit her effectively. She was standing right against his chest. Before he could react, to grab her or push her away, she acted. She drove the heel of her hand upward, under his chin. Her other hand simultaneously went to the small of his back, pushing forward. It was a perfect application of leverage. His head was forced back, and his spine was forced to arch. His center of gravity was completely compromised. For a terrifying second, he was balanced on his heels, his body forming an unnatural backward C. Then, gravity took over. He fell backward with a heavy thud that knocked the wind out of him. His head hit the pavement, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but enough to daze him, to send a jarring shock through his skull. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He lay there, gasping for breath, the world spinning. He couldn't understand what was happening. This tiny girl moved like smoke. She didn't hit him with power, but with a kind of surgical precision that took his own strength and used it as a weapon against him. Ava stood over him, her shadow falling across his face. There was no triumph in her eyes, no anger. There was only a quiet sadness. "It's over, Dylan," she said softly. He tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't obey. His knee throbbed, his head swam, and his pride was shattered into a million pieces. He looked up at her, at this impossible child, and for the first time, he felt a sliver of fear. Who are you?" he choked out. Ava knelt beside him, not as a victor, but as a teacher addressing a student. "My name is Ava Peterson. My mother is Carol Peterson, the woman you and your friends have been tormenting." She paused, letting that sink in. "And my grandfather was General Michael Callahan," she continued, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "He spent 50 years serving this country. He fought in 3 wars. He taught me that a person's worth has nothing to do with their job, or their size, or how loud they can shout. It has to do with their character, with their honor." She looked at him, her blue eyes searching his. "He also taught me that true strength is about control. I haven't seriously hurt you, Dylan. I could have. The strike to your knee could have torn a ligament. The fall could have given you a concussion. I controlled the outcome. That is strength." Dylan just stared, speechless. The name General Callahan didn't mean much to him, but the way she spoke, the absolute authority in her voice, held him captive. "This is your one and only warning," Ava said, her voice turning firm. "You will leave my mother alone. You will leave me alone. You will stop bullying other students. You will find a better way to feel strong." She stood up and walked over to her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. "If I see you or your friends bothering anyone again, our next conversation will be very different, and I won't be as careful." She turned and walked away, her small frame silhouetted against the setting sun. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The lesson had been delivered. Dylan lay on the cold asphalt for a long time, the physical pain in his knee and head slowly being replaced by a deeper, more profound ache. He had been utterly and completely defeated, not by fists, not by rage, but by a quiet, controlled precision he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The king of Northwood High had been dethroned by a 12-year-old girl in an empty parking lot, and the foundation of his entire world had crumbled beneath him. The silence in the aftermath of the confrontation was more potent than any rumor. Dylan didn't tell anyone what happened. He couldn't. How could he explain that a girl half his size had dismantled him in under a minute without throwing a single punch? He limped into school the next day, blaming a pulled muscle from football practice. He was sullen and withdrawn. When his friends, Mark and Chris, tried to joke about the little janitor's kid, he shot them a look so venomous they immediately fell silent. Ava, for her part, returned to her quiet routine. But something had changed. The space around her in the hallways seemed to widen slightly. Students would watch her, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. They didn't know what had happened, but they knew that Dylan Hayes, the untouchable titan of their school, was now avoiding a 12-year-old girl. The power dynamic of Northwood High had been fractured, and no one knew what would come next. The story, however, did not stay buried. A teacher, Mr. Albright, a history teacher who was also a veteran, had seen the end of the confrontation from his classroom window. He hadn't seen the fight itself, but he had seen Dylan on the ground and Ava walking away. He also heard her mention her grandfather's name. General Michael "Iron Mike" Callahan was a legend in military circles, a figure of immense respect. Curiosity piqued, Mr. Albright did some research. He confirmed that Carol Peterson was indeed General Callahan's daughter-in-law, and Ava was his only grandchild. The next day, he asked Ava to stay after class. "Ava," he began gently, "I don't want to pry, but I overheard you mention your grandfather's name yesterday. Was that General Michael Callahan?" Ava nodded, her guard slightly up. "Yes, sir." Mr. Albright leaned back in his chair, a look of deep admiration on his face. "I served for 10 years. Your grandfather, he was a hero. His doctrines on tactical discipline and de-escalation are still taught today. He believed the greatest weapon was a calm mind." Ava's shoulders relaxed. For the first time at this school, she felt seen. "He taught me a few things," she admitted. "I have no doubt," Mr. Albright said with a knowing smile. "I also know that Dylan Hayes has been making life difficult for many students here, yourself included. Whatever happened yesterday, it seems to have had an effect. But I want to offer you some advice, soldier to soldier, so to speak." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "A victory on the battlefield is only the beginning. Winning the peace is the harder part. People are watching you now, Ava. Some are scared, some are impressed. What you do next will define who you are here." His words resonated with Ava. She had won the confrontation, but now what? She had only wanted to be left alone, to protect her mother. But Mr. Albright was right. Her actions had created a power vacuum, and a new kind of challenge was emerging. It began subtly. A freshman boy, who was constantly harassed by older students for his stutter, approached her in the library. He placed a book on her table and whispered, "Thank you," before hurrying away. A girl who was often the target of mean-spirited gossip about her clothes gave Ava a small, shy smile in the hallway. They saw her not as a fighter, but as a symbol. She had stood up to the biggest bully and won. She represented hope. The first real test of her new role came a week later. A group of students from the wrestling team had taken to claiming a particular section of the cafeteria, shoving away anyone who tried to sit there. Their leader was a boy named Kevin, who was almost as arrogant as Dylan, but without the charisma. Ava was eating her lunch when she saw Kevin and his friends push a younger boy, sending his tray clattering to the floor. The boy, mortified, scrambled to pick up the mess as Kevin's group laughed. It was a scene painfully similar to the one that had started it all. Ava felt a familiar stirring of anger, but she tempered it with her grandfather's wisdom. Assess the situation. What is the objective? The objective was not to fight Kevin. It was to stop the bullying and restore order. She finished her lunch, packed her bag, and walked over to the table. Kevin and his friends tensed as she approached. "This is our table, kid. Get lost," one of them grunted. Ava ignored him and spoke directly to Kevin, her voice quiet but firm. "You have a lot of strength, all of you," she said, gesturing to the group. "You could use it to be the best wrestling team in the state. Or you can use it to push around kids who are smaller than you." Kevin scoffed. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" "Nobody," Ava said honestly. "But I know what it looks like when people are afraid. And I know strength that's used to create fear isn't strength at all. It's a liability." She looked him directly in the eye. Dylan Hayes thought he was strong, too. The mention of Dylan's name was like a shockwave. His defeat was still a subject of intense speculation. By invoking it, Ava wasn't threatening them. She was reminding them that the established order had changed. She was presenting them with a choice. Kevin stared at her, a conflict playing out on his face. He could escalate, try to prove he was tougher than Dylan. Or he could listen. Ava's calm, her complete lack of fear, was disarming. She wasn't challenging his strength, but his character. Finally, he looked away, a flicker of something, shame, perhaps, in his eyes. "Whatever," he muttered, turning back to his food. It wasn't an apology, but it was a concession. A small victory. Ava gave a slight nod and walked away. From that day on, while the wrestlers still sat at that table, they no longer shoved other students away. A tiny pocket of peace had been won. Mr. Albright had seen the exchange from across the cafeteria. He approached Ava later that day. "That was masterfully done, Ava," he said. "You disarmed him without a single threat. You used psychology. Your grandfather would have been proud." He paused. "You have a rare talent." Not just for self-defense, but for leadership. Have you ever thought about teaching others? Ava was taken aback. Teaching what? What your grandfather taught you, he replied. Not how to fight. How to be confident. How to stand up for yourself without throwing a punch. How to de-escalate a situation. There are a lot of kids in this school who could use that. They don't need a warrior. They need a teacher. The idea took root in Ava's mind. She had never considered it. Her skills were a private legacy, a connection to the man she missed so dearly. But what if Mr. Albright was right? What if the best way to honor her grandfather's memory wasn't just to use his teachings for herself, but to share them? Meanwhile, Dylan was on a journey of his own. His world had been upended. His friends treated him differently, with a new, subtle caution. The fear he used to command had been replaced by a quiet ridicule he could feel just beneath the surface of every conversation. He found himself watching Ava from a distance. He saw her interaction with the wrestling team. He saw the respectful nods she received from younger students. He saw that she wielded more power with her quiet confidence than he ever had with his fists and his reputation. The humiliation of his defeat began to slowly transform into a grudging respect, which then morphed into a painful, introspective curiosity. He needed to understand. One afternoon, he found her in the library, the one place he rarely set foot in. He approached her table hesitantly, his usual swagger completely gone. He looked awkward, like a lion trying to move through a field of porcelain. Ava looked up from her book, her expression neutral but watchful. Can I talk to you? Dylan asked, his voice low. Ava simply nodded, gesturing to the empty chair opposite her. He sat down, his large frame looking out of place on the small library chair. He struggled for words for a long moment. How did you do it? He finally asked. What you did in the parking lot. I've never seen anything like it. Ava closed her book. It wasn't about being stronger or faster than you. It was about understanding balance and leverage. And it was about not being angry. I was angry enough for both of us, Dylan admitted, a bitter smile on his face. He looked down at his hands. You said your grandfather was a general? Yes. And he taught you all that. He taught me how to think. Ava corrected gently. The rest is just practice. They sat in silence for another minute. The quiet of the library felt profound. Everyone is laughing at me, Dylan said, the confession costing him dearly. They think you beat me up. I didn't, Ava said. You beat yourself. Your anger, your pride, they were my best weapons. It was a hard truth, but Dylan couldn't deny it. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than arrogance in them. She saw a flicker of genuine confusion, of a boy who had built his entire identity on a foundation of sand and had just watched the tide come in. Could you teach me? He asked, the words barely a whisper. Ava was stunned. Of all the possible outcomes of their confrontation, this was the one she had never, ever imagined. The bully was asking his victim to become his mentor. It was a moral challenge, a twist she didn't see coming. Her grandfather's voice returned to her. The greatest victory is not to defeat an enemy, but to change him. She looked at Dylan, truly looked at him, and saw not just the bully, but the lost kid underneath. She made a decision. I'm thinking of starting a club, she said slowly. With Mr. Albright. It's not about fighting. It's about discipline, control, situational awareness. For anyone who wants to learn. She held his gaze. It will be difficult. You'd have to start from the beginning. You'd be just another student. No special treatment. Can you handle that? A long moment passed. The old Dylan would have stormed out, insulted. But the boy sitting before her was different. He had been humbled. He had been broken down and was looking for a new way to build himself back up. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, he said. I think I can. In that moment, Ava realized her victory in the parking lot was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far more complex and far more important. She had not just defeated a bully. She had sown the seeds of an alliance that had the potential to change the entire culture of Northwood High. The peace was just beginning, and its path would be far more challenging than the fight had ever been. The first meeting of what came to be known as the Northwood Self-Discipline Club was held on a Tuesday afternoon in the school's auxiliary gym, a smaller space with worn wooden floors and the lingering scent of old leather and sweat. Mr. Albright had secured the space, putting his own name on the line to vouch for the unconventional new group. Ava had expected maybe 5 or 6 people to show up. Mr. Albright had put up a small, discreet flyer that read, "Learn situational awareness, de-escalation, and self-control. All are welcome." He had deliberately avoided words like defense or martial arts. 22 students came. They were a motley crew, a cross-section of the school's social strata. There was the freshman boy with the stutter who had thanked Ava in the library. There were a couple of girls who were known targets of gossip and online bullying. There were quiet, studious kids from the honors program and a few athletes from the track team who were curious. And then, standing awkwardly by the door, was Dylan Hayes. His presence sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. He was wearing simple gym shorts and a t-shirt, no Letterman jacket, no swagger. He looked like a guest at a party where he didn't know anyone. His old friends, Mark and Chris, were nowhere to be seen. They had laughed in his face when he'd told them he was going. "You're going to let that little girl teach you? You're pathetic," Chris had sneered. For the first time, Dylan hadn't risen to the bait. He just walked away. Ava stood in the center of the gym with Mr. Albright. She wore simple sweats, her blonde hair tied back. She looked even smaller in the large, open space. She waited for the room to quiet down, her patience a tangible force. When all eyes were on her, she began. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice clear and carrying easily. "This isn't a self-defense class. I'm not going to teach you how to fight. If you want to learn how to fight, join the wrestling team or a karate dojo. I'm going to teach you how not to fight." She paused, letting that sink in. "My grandfather used to say that most fights are lost before a single punch is thrown," she continued. "They're lost because of ego, or fear, or anger. They're lost because you weren't paying attention to your surroundings. We're going to work on the things that happen before a fight. We're going to work on control. Control of yourselves, and control of the situation." Mr. Albright stepped forward. "The first lesson is awareness. Most of us walk around in a bubble. We're looking at our phones, listening to music, lost in our own thoughts. We're easy targets. Your first task is to learn to see." For the next hour, they didn't do a single physical exercise. Instead, Mr. Albright and Ava led them through a series of observation drills. They had to close their eyes and describe the room in detail. The number of windows, the color of the mats stacked in the corner, the scuff marks on the floor. They worked in pairs, observing each other for 30 seconds, then turning around and trying to list 5 things about their partner's appearance. It was surprisingly difficult. Students who had been in the same classes for years couldn't remember the color of each other's eyes. Dylan, paired with the shy freshman boy, found himself struggling. He was used to being the center of attention, not paying attention to others. He fumbled through his description, feeling a flush of embarrassment. The freshman, however, timidly but accurately described the small scar above Dylan's eyebrow and the brand of his running shoes. For a moment, their roles were reversed. The quiet, observant boy was the expert. The star athlete was the novice. The session ended not with a bang, but with a quiet sense of focus. Ava gave them their homework. "For the rest of the week, I want you to practice active observation," she instructed. "When you walk down the hall, don't look at your phone. Look at the people. Notice who walks with confidence and who doesn't. Notice the exits in every room you enter. See the world around you. We'll discuss what you saw next week." As the students filed out, many of them buzzing with a newfound energy, Dylan hung back. "That's it?" he asked, a hint of his old skepticism in his voice. "We just looked at stuff? What did you see when you looked at David, the boy you were paired with?" Ava asked. Dylan shrugged. "I don't know. He's small. He stutters. I saw that he bites his nails, which means he's anxious," Ava said. "His backpack is worn out, but his books are in perfect condition, which means he's careful with the things that matter to him. And he never looked you in the eye until the very end of the exercise. Then he did, just for a second, which means he's scared, but he's trying to be brave." She met Dylan's gaze. "You saw a stereotype. I saw a person. That's the difference. That's what we're learning here." Dylan had no response. He just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face, and left the gym. He had come expecting to learn secret fighting moves. Instead, he was being taught to see, and it was already changing the way he viewed the world. Carol Peterson watched her daughter's transformation with a mix of pride and anxiety. Her quiet, withdrawn child was now a leader, a teacher. She would hear snippets of conversation from the students as she cleaned the hallways after school. They spoke of Ava with a reverence that bordered on awe. One evening, as she was mopping the floor outside the auxiliary gym, she saw the club letting out. She watched as Ava spoke with a few students, her posture calm and confident. She saw Dylan Hayes, the boy who had caused her so much heartache, listening intently, nodding with a respect he had never shown an adult, let alone a 12-year-old. Later that night in their small apartment, which still smelled faintly of the industrial cleaners Carol used at work, she finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Are you sure about this, sweetie?" she asked, her hands busy mending a rip in Ava's jeans. "Teaching these kids?" "Teaching him." Ava sat at the kitchen table, finishing her homework. She looked up, her blue eyes serious. "I have to, Mom. It's what Grandpa would have done." "Your grandfather was a general, commanding soldiers," Carol said softly. "These are just kids. Hurt kids. Angry kids. Soldiers are the same," Ava replied. "He always said that you don't build a strong army by teaching people how to hate the enemy in front of them. You do it by teaching them to protect the person standing next to them. That's all I'm doing. I'm teaching them how to stand next to each other." Carol put down her sewing, walked over, and kissed the top of her daughter's head. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by an immense wave of love. Her daughter had her father's eyes, but she had Michael Callahan's spirit. As the weeks went on, the club's sessions evolved. They moved from simple observation to situational drills. Ava and Mr. Albright would create scenarios. One student would have to walk through a gauntlet of others who would try to verbally harass them. The goal wasn't to ignore the taunts, but to acknowledge them, control one's own emotional response, and move through the situation with calm purpose. They called it navigating the storm. Dylan struggled with these exercises more than anyone. His lifelong instinct was to meet aggression with greater aggression, to be a wall. Ava taught him to be water instead. "He's baiting you," she'd say in a drill where another student was playing the part of an aggressive bully. "He wants you to get angry. That's his territory. Don't go there." She showed him how to use centered breathing to calm his racing heart, how to use direct but non-confrontational language, and how to position his body to signal a lack of threat while still protecting his personal space. It was like learning a new language. He failed repeatedly, his frustration mounting. But for the first time in his life, he didn't quit when something got hard. The memory of his humiliation in the parking lot was a powerful motivator. He wanted to understand the strength Ava possessed, a strength that had nothing to do with the size of his muscles. His old friends, Mark and Chris, saw his change as a betrayal. They cornered him one day by his locker. "We don't get it, man," Mark said, his heavy brow furrowed in confusion. "You're the king of this school, and you're letting some little girl lead you around by the nose." "She's not leading me," Dylan said, his voice even, using the calm he'd been practicing. "She's teaching me." "Teaching you what?" "How to be a wimp," Chris sneered, shoving Dylan's shoulder. The old Dylan would have shoved back harder, escalating the confrontation in a heartbeat. The new Dylan held his ground, but he didn't retaliate. He looked at Chris, really looked at him, and saw what Ava had taught him to see. The insecurity behind the smirk, the fear of losing his position now that his leader was changing. "No," Dylan said calmly. "She's teaching me that I don't have to shove people to feel strong." He closed his locker and walked away, leaving them standing there, speechless and confused. It was a bigger victory than any fight he had ever won. He had navigated his own storm. The club's real test, however, came from outside the school walls. Oakhaven, like many small towns, had its share of troubles. A group of older teenagers from a neighboring town, kids who had already dropped out of school, had taken to hanging out at the local park in the evenings. They were known for causing trouble, vandalism, petty theft, and harassing anyone who crossed their path. One Friday evening, a few members of Ava's club, including David, the freshman with the stutter, were cutting through the park on their way home. The group of older teens, led by a wiry, menacing boy named Rick, blocked their path. "Look what we have here," Rick said with a predatory grin, stepping in front of David. "Gonna give us your wallet? Or do we have to take it?" David froze, his old anxieties flooding back. His stutter, which had been improving with his newfound confidence, returned with a vengeance. I don't want any trouble," he stammered. The other club members, two sophomore girls, stood frozen in fear. Everything they had practiced in the gym suddenly felt a million miles away. This wasn't a drill. The threat was real. But then, the training kicked in. It wasn't Ava's voice they heard in their heads, but the principles she had taught them. Awareness. Control. De-escalation. One of the girls, Sarah, took a slow, deliberate breath, just as she'd been taught. She scanned the area. She saw the path Rick's group was blocking. She saw another path leading out of the park about 30 yards to their left. She saw the streetlights and the houses beyond them. They were not completely isolated. That was crucial information. She stepped forward slightly, not to confront Rick, but to stand beside David, a small gesture of solidarity. "We were just heading home," she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear. She didn't challenge Rick, she just stated a fact. Rick turned his attention to her. "Nobody's going anywhere until we get what we want." He took a step toward her. At that moment, a new voice cut through the tension. "I don't think you do." Everyone turned. Dylan Hayes was standing at the edge of the park, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. He had been on his way home from a workout and had seen the confrontation unfolding. Rick's group eyed him warily. Dylan was bigger than all of them, a known football star. He was an intimidating presence. "This ain't your business, Hayes," Rick snarled. "Walk away." The old Dylan would have charged in, fists flying. He would have seen this as a chance to reassert his dominance, to be the hero. But as he walked forward, his pace was measured, his hands open at his sides. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't angry. He was calm. He stopped a safe distance away, positioning himself so he wasn't blocking anyone's exit. He was creating space, not closing it. "These kids are with me," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "We're all just going home. There's no need for this to go any further." He wasn't threatening them. He was offering them a way out. He was de-escalating. He looked at Rick, making eye contact, and he saw the same things he had learned to see in Chris, the fear masquerading as aggression. "Look, man," Dylan said, his tone shifting, becoming almost conversational. "It's Friday night. We all have better things to do than this. Let us walk, and we all go on with our night. No harm, no foul." Rick was caught off guard. He had expected a fight, a challenge to his authority. He didn't know how to respond to this calm, reasonable approach, especially coming from someone who could clearly handle himself physically. His own group started to look uncertain, glancing at each other. The thrill of the confrontation was draining away, replaced by an awkward tension. Dylan's presence, combined with the unexpected lack of aggression, had completely changed the dynamic. He had taken control of the situation without raising his voice or his fists. Rick hesitated for another long moment, his ego warring with his common sense. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Whatever. They're not worth it anyway." He and his group backed off, melting back into the shadows of the park. For a moment, everyone was silent, the adrenaline slowly receding. David looked at Dylan, his eyes wide with gratitude and awe. You saved us." Dylan shook his head, a small, unfamiliar smile on his face. "No," he said, looking at Sarah and the other girl. "You saved yourselves. You stayed calm. You didn't panic. I just showed up at the end." He turned and looked back into the dark park. He understood now. The real power wasn't in the punch you threw. It was in the one you didn't have to. He had won a bigger victory that night than any he had ever achieved on the football field, and he hadn't laid a hand on anyone. He had won the peace. And as he walked the younger students home under the glow of the streetlights, he felt a sense of pride and purpose that was entirely new and infinitely more satisfying. The lesson was complete. The story of what happened in the park spread even faster than the story of the parking lot confrontation. This time, however, the narrative was different. It wasn't a story of a mysterious takedown. It was a public demonstration of a new kind of strength. Dylan Hayes, the former tyrant, had become a protector, and he had done it without violence. This single event solidified the club's reputation. It was no longer seen as a quirky group run by a strange little girl. It became a symbol of a changing tide at Northwood High. Membership swelled. Athletes, honor students, and kids from every social circle started showing up on Tuesdays. They weren't just coming to learn self-defense. They were coming to be part of the new culture that was taking root, a culture of mutual respect and quiet confidence. The school itself began to transform. The ambient level of aggression in the hallways seemed to drop. Fights became rarer. Teachers noticed students were more focused in class, more willing to speak up, more supportive of one another. Mr. Albright started incorporating the club's principles into his history lessons, discussing the psychology of conflict in ancient Rome or the de-escalation tactics used by great diplomats. He called it living history. Dylan, once the enforcer of a brutal social hierarchy, became its unlikely guardian of peace. He would see a situation brewing in the cafeteria, a group of older kids intimidating a freshman, and he would simply walk over and stand there. His calm, watchful presence was usually enough to defuse the tension. He never had to say a word. He had learned from Ava that the loudest man in the room was the weakest, and now he was embracing the power of silence. He was a different person. He started studying, bringing his grades up. He quit the football team at the end of the season, telling the shocked coach that he wanted to focus on his future. He wasn't sure what that future was, but he knew it didn't involve running over people, on or off the field. Ava remained the quiet center of it all. She never sought the spotlight. During club meetings, she would often let senior members, like Dylan or Sarah, lead the drills. She was the architect, the strategist, content to watch the structure she had designed grow stronger. She had found her place, not by trying to fit in, but by creating a space where everyone else could. She and her mother were no longer just the janitor and her daughter. They were integral parts of the Northwood community. Carol would often find small gifts left for her on her cleaning cart: an apple, a flower, a thank you note. The disrespect that had once been a daily torment had vanished completely. But such a profound change could not go unnoticed, and not all attention was positive. Rumors began to circulate among the parents and the school board. Divorced from context, the stories sounded alarming. They heard about a fight club run by a middle schooler. They heard that the former school bully, Dylan Hayes, was her second in command. They heard that students were being taught military techniques. The concern was spearheaded by a school board member named Mrs. Jennings, a stern woman who believed discipline was the sole purview of adults, and that any student-led group was a recipe for disaster. She saw the world in black and white, and to her, a club that involved any form of physical confrontation was a liability waiting to happen. She called an emergency meeting of the Parent-Teacher Association with the club's future on the agenda. The motion was simple: to immediately and permanently disband the Northwood Self-Discipline Club. Mr. Albright was summoned to the principal's office. He found Principal Thompson looking grim, with Mrs. Jennings sitting stiffly in the chair opposite his desk. "Frank, I've supported this club of yours," the principal began, his voice heavy. "I've seen the positive effects. But the board is getting immense pressure. Parents are worried." Mrs. Jennings has compiled a dossier. Mrs. Jennings slid a thick folder across the desk. "This club, run by a 12-year-old and a reformed bully, is a powder keg," she stated, her voice sharp and accusatory. "It teaches violence. It encourages vigilantism. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fighting at this school, and you are running a class on the subject. It must be shut down before a child gets seriously hurt and the school is sued for negligence." "With all due respect, Mrs. Jennings, you are fundamentally mistaken about what we teach," Mr. Albright countered, his voice firm but respectful. "We teach the opposite of violence. We teach control, awareness, and de-escalation. We have reduced the number of incidents at this school by nearly 60% in 3 months." "Anecdotal evidence," Mrs. Jennings snapped. "The risk is unacceptable. The board will be voting on this at the public meeting next Thursday. I suggest you and your little leader prepare for the inevitable." The news hit the club like a physical blow. The space they had built, the community they had forged, was under threat. Their first instinct was anger. They felt misunderstood, unfairly judged. "We should protest," one student shouted at their next meeting. "We should show them what we can do," said another. The gym buzzed with indignant energy. It was a storm, the very kind they had trained to navigate. Ava let them vent. She stood quietly, listening, her expression unreadable. Dylan stood beside her, his jaw tight with a familiar, old anger. He felt a primal urge to fight, to lash out at the injustice. But he looked at Ava, and he saw her calm, and it reminded him of his training. Anger is a flood. It drowns thought. When the room finally quieted down, all eyes turned to Ava. "They're afraid," she said simply. "Mrs. Jennings, the parents, they're afraid of what they don't understand. If we protest, if we get angry, we will only prove them right. We will look like the violent kids they think we are. So what do? Just let them shut us down?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with despair. "No," Ava said. "We don't tell them what we do. We show them." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every student. "We will attend the school board meeting. and we will give them a demonstration, not of fighting, of control, of awareness, of discipline. A new energy filled the room, replacing anger with purpose. This was their final test. It wouldn't be in a parking lot or a park. It would be in a brightly lit auditorium, in front of the adults who held their fate in their hands. They would have to win the peace. The night of the school board meeting, the auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, and students filled the seats. Mrs. Jennings sat with the other board members on the stage, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She had the votes. This was a formality. The agenda item was announced: a vote on the immediate dissolution of the unsanctioned self-discipline club. Mrs. Jennings spoke first, laying out her case with cold precision. She used inflammatory language, talking about the dangers of amateur martial arts, the psychological risks of putting a known bully in a position of power, and the irresponsibility of allowing a mere child to instruct other students. When she finished, there was a tense silence. The principal then called on Mr. Albright to speak. He walked to the podium and placed a single piece of paper on it. "Good evening," he said. "I could stand here and give you statistics about reduced detentions and fewer fights. I could give you testimonials from teachers about the improved atmosphere in our school. But I don't believe that's what's needed tonight. The core of this issue, as Mrs. Jennings has pointed out, is a lack of understanding." He turned to the board. "So, with your permission, I would like to turn my time over to the students of the club for a brief demonstration." Mrs. Jennings started to object, but the board chairman, a thoughtful man named Mr. Henderson, motioned for her to be silent. "Proceed, Mr. Albright." Ava walked onto the stage. Her small presence immediately commanded the room's attention. She was followed by Dylan, David, and Sarah. "My name is Ava Peterson," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified by the microphone. "We're not going to show you how to fight. We're going to show you how we think." For the next 15 minutes, they recreated the exercises from the club. They started with the observation drills. Sarah stood with her back to the audience, and Ava asked them to shout out questions. "What color are her shoes? Is she wearing a watch?" The audience, like the students on their first day, fumbled. Sarah then turned around, and David, with a new, clear voice, described 5 precise details about a man in the third row, down to the brand of his pen. The point was made. They were learning to see. Then came the de-escalation drill. Dylan stood in the middle of the stage. "I need a volunteer," Ava said, "someone who can pretend to be very angry and aggressive." After a moment of hesitation, a father from the audience, a large, burly man, volunteered. "I can do that," he said, a skeptical look on his face. He got on stage and squared off with Dylan. "Okay, kid, let's see what you've got." He began shouting, using the kind of generic, aggressive language a bully might use. Dylan didn't meet the aggression. He took a small step back, creating space. He kept his hands open, non-threatening. He made eye contact, but he didn't glare. He just listened. When the man paused to take a breath, Dylan spoke, his voice low and calm. "I hear that you're angry. I'm not looking for a problem. I just want to understand." The man was thrown off. He tried to ramp up the aggression, but Dylan refused to take the bait. He kept his center, breathed, and responded with calm, non-confrontational language. He was a rock in the middle of a storm, and the man's artificial rage began to feel ridiculous, even to himself. After another minute, he just stopped, shaking his head in disbelief. I don't know what to do," the man admitted with a chuckle. "It's impossible to stay mad at him. He won't fight back." The audience applauded. Finally, it was time for the closing argument. But it wasn't Ava or Mr. Albright who delivered it. It was Dylan. He walked to the podium, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the crowd, at his parents, at the faces of the students he used to torment. "My whole life," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought being strong was about making people afraid of you. I was good at it. It was easy, and it made my life empty." He looked at Ava, who stood by the side of the stage, watching him with quiet pride. "This club and this girl taught me something different. They taught me that real strength isn't about making people afraid. It's about making them feel safe. It's not about winning fights. It's about stopping them before they ever start." "Mrs. Jennings, you're right. I was a bully, and I'm sorry for it. But this club is not what made me a bully. It's what's helping me become a better man." He stepped back from the podium. The auditorium was completely silent for a moment, and then, it erupted. The applause was thunderous, a wave of support that washed over the stage. It wasn't just for the demonstration. It was for the raw, honest courage they had just witnessed. The final speaker of the night was an unscheduled one. A woman from the back of the room walked to the podium. It was Ava Peterson. She was still in her janitor's uniform, having come straight from her shift. "I'm Ava's mother," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I don't know about military tactics or school board policies, but I know my daughter, and I know this school. A few months ago, I came to work every day feeling invisible, feeling ashamed. My daughter felt the same way. We were the help. People looked through us." She looked at the students from the club, who were watching her with tears in their eyes. "Now, when I walk the halls, students say hello to me. They ask me how my day is. They hold doors for me. This school has become a community. It has become a kind place. That is not a liability. That is a miracle. And it's a miracle that my daughter and Mr. Albright and all these wonderful kids created. Please," she looked at the board, her voice breaking slightly, "please don't take that away." She walked back to her seat. The vote was a mere formality now. The motion to disband the club was defeated unanimously. The motion to officially recognize and fund it was passed unanimously. In the aftermath, Mrs. Jennings approached Mr. Albright and Ava. Her stern expression had softened. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I misunderstood. What you are doing here is remarkable." The story of Northwood High and its unusual club became a model for the district and then for the state. But for Ava, the greatest victory was quieter. It was in the confident way David now spoke, free of his stutter. It was in the easy friendship she now shared with Dylan. Most of all, it was in the proud, happy smile on her mother's face. One afternoon, months later, Ava found a small, unmarked box in her locker. Inside, nestled on a piece of velvet, was an old, tarnished silver medal. It was a Carnegie Medal awarded for heroism. A small, engraved plaque on the back read, "To General Michael Callahan, for courage in the face of conflict." 1968. Pinned to the velvet was a short, handwritten note. "My grandfather received this a long time ago. He said a true hero doesn't seek conflict, but has the courage to stand for peace. I think he would have wanted you to have it. DH." Ava closed the box, a lump in her throat. Her grandfather's legacy was safe. It wasn't just a memory kept in an old photograph. It was alive and well, breathing in the hallways of Northwood High, in the hearts of the students who had learned that the greatest strength, the only strength that truly mattered, was the quiet, unshakable strength of character. The janitor's daughter had cleaned up more than just the floors of the school. She had cleaned up its soul. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.